David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for making the time. And I want to just introduce you first and get right into it. So
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, David. You received a Pulitzer Prize for your New York Times articles displaying exquisite command of tax law, and you're the best-selling author of Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and Fine Print, which are all books on corporate malfeasance and wealth inequality. And along with that, you've written 2 international bestsellers on Mr. Trump. And also the editor-in-chief of DCReport.org, and over the last 10 years, you've been at Syracuse University as a law school lecturer, teaching business, property, and tax law. And as you proclaim, you're not a lawyer, but an investigative reporter. And you've won numerous awards, a Pulitzer Prize, an IRE Medal, and the George Polk Award. And you started DCReport.org in late 2016, coincidentally, with the Trump administration ushering in. So David, we'll start with Donald Trump. I hope we don't talk all about Donald Trump the whole time, because he just takes up too much time. But we'll go. And interestingly, 3 weeks ago, we had technical problems, so we couldn't go on. But 3 weeks in the Trump era is like a lifetime, so a lot has happened since then. Last time I would have asked you about John Bolton, this time about Mary Trump and tax Supreme Court and worsening pandemic. So before we dig into this, I just want to ask you, how long have you known Trump, and what was he like back then? And can you say you saw it coming?
Well, I met Donald Trump in the early June of 1988. I had left the LA Times, where I was the first journalist to seriously investigate the LAPD, and was writing about chokehold deaths back then, but we didn't have cell phone video, unfortunately. And I had gone to cover the casino industry for the Philadelphia Inquirer, because the claim had been made and was in the news that New Jersey had figured out how to clean up this vice-ridden industry and make it honest and keep the mob out of it and whatnot. And I went and eventually wrote a book that's about half of it's about Donald, called Temples of Chance. And what it showed was there was a complete facade of tough regulation, but it was a facade. And Donald Trump prospered in this environment because once he was licensed, and he never should have qualified for a casino license, the government set out to protect itself, because they were never going to admit they'd made a mistake. So they never asked a question that the answer to which would have caused them to lose their license. And he just ran roughshod. He was totally incompetent. His own executives were constantly telling me stories about how he didn't know anything about the casino business. He was awkward and drove away some customers. Instead of reinvesting in the business like his competitors, he kept sucking cash out as fast as he could and spending it. Donald is not a wealth creator. You know, most of us who found a business do so to create wealth. Donald creates businesses only to suck all the money he can out of them and then throw the carcass aside. And I knew back then very quickly that Donald was going to be a significant cultural force in America. I did not perceive, even though he talked about it, that he would become president of the United States. Now, when he announced 5 years ago, June 16th of 2015, I immediately dropped everything I was doing, Michael, to start trying to get my fellow journalists to understand who Trump is and what he was doing. And as Donald himself said after he became president, I failed. And he's right, I did my best, but the news coverage of the 2016 campaign is one of the worst examples ever in the history of American journalism. Mm-hmm. All this attention about, Hillary Clinton's emails, never a word about the fact that she's a Bible-toting in her purse Methodist who got on her knees and prayed with her staff every day, while Donald Trump was allowed to call himself a Christian, even though he says his life philosophy is revenge, and what gives him pleasure in life is he has fantasies about physically abusing people and in other ways destroying their lives, which means, of course, he's an anti-Christian. And no exploration of Donald's involvement with the drug trafficker Michael Wexelbaum. I think Donald was clearly in the cocaine trafficking business on the financing side. And no exploration of all sorts of other things about him. But I was concerned from the day of his announcement that he might get the presidency. I leavened it a little by saying, well, I think he can get the nomination but not get elected. Well, we now know that he was able to get elected because of all sorts of cheating, suppressing votes, help from the Russians through advertising, et cetera. An election that he shouldn't have won had it been conducted properly.
Pretty much business as usual for Donald Trump.
Absolutely, that's exactly right, Michael. Business as usual for Donald.
Yeah, so you wrote the book, The Making of Donald Trump, and then a year or two later you wrote, It's Worse Than You Think, What Trump's Administration is Doing to America.
Right. The Making of Donald Trump was the biography that came out in 2016. I tried to sell a biography of him in 2015, and the publishers were all, oh, he's going to fail. He's not. Yeah. I kept saying, no, you don't understand what's going on. And frankly, the only two people who got it right in 2012 when Trump ran were Lawrence O'Donnell and I. It's surprising to me how often, despite our very different backgrounds, he and I come up with the same ideas at the same time. We both said he's running for a new contract with NBC. And you may recall, as soon as he got his contract, he announced, oh, I should be president. The country needs me, but my television show needs me more. And the net effect of that was that the politics reporters who wouldn't listen to us, they had egg on their face. And that's why I knew it was so dangerous when he announced in 2015, because the politics reporters, I was certain, would dismiss him as a vanity candidate, and they shouldn't have.
Yeah, little did they know. So today is the publication date of Mary Trump's book, Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. And, you know, she spills the secrets. Oh, did you read it, by the way?
Oh, yeah. All marked up. I've written about it. She thanked me in the book in a list of journalists for the work we've done.
Yeah. So
I've never spoken to her, but I've read her book.
You wrote on dcreport.org that her book deserves your close attention. Donald Trump's niece has two advantages that the small band of us who have long studied Trump closely do not. So could you say more about that?
Well, as a family member, she was present at all sorts of events. And of course, nobody knows us better than, first of all, our spouse, and then secondly, the rest of the family around us. And so she was there when Donald did all sorts of inappropriate and odd things, like the night that her father, Fred Trump Jr., was taken to the hospital with a heart attack and he died. The parents, Fred Trump, who was a monster, and his very repressed, depressed wife, they sat in the living room. Donald and his younger sister, Elizabeth, went to the movies. I mean, who does this? Your son or your sibling is in the hospital with a heart attack and you go to the movies or you sit in the living room. I mean, this is not a home of love. This is a home of lucre. All that mattered in that home was money. And whether you got it by bribery, stealing, political connections, as long as you didn't get arrested, anything was okay. So she brings us this insider's knowledge. The second thing she brings us is Mary Trump is a clinical psychologist with a doctoral degree. And so she's able to apply her knowledge. And one of the things that comes across very clearly in the book is her deep sense of obligation to tell the country, because clearly too many people in the country don't understand. Donald Trump isn't just a narcissist. He is a sociopath. That is, he has no regard for anybody else, something I've said for years, and I'm not a clinical psychologist. Mm-hmm. He will sell out the whole country to benefit himself. He has, everybody else is an object to Donald. You're not a person. Even his family members, they're not people, they are objects. And it's a very sad story, by the way. I have people say, oh, you're jealous of Donald because his wife is so beautiful and he's so rich. And I'm like, are you nuts? What a miserable life to be Donald Trump, a man who has never known a moment of joy or contentment in his life, and whose relationships are all transactional. And if you think his marriage to Melania Trump is anything other than a commercial relationship, and it may be hard for a lot of people to understand that many people at the top in business and politics, they have commercial marriages. They're not marriages in the sense that we think of a romantic ideal like I'm very fortunate to have. But that's what it is. And the new biography of Melania Trump makes that pretty clear, by the way. Uh-huh. She's just like him, except she's not crazy.
Yeah. I have not read Mary Trump's book yet, but I've read enough of the writers writing about, including you, what you wrote, and it
Right.
does sound, and I saw that already, it was #1 on Amazon. So
Oh yeah, and I expect the book by the Washington Post reporter about Melania will do pretty well too.
yeah.
She did a lot of work because Melania Trump's very much a cipher. It's not clear what she's about, but the fundamental thing we know about her is she has no friends from the past, which tells you her relationships are all transactional, just like Donald.
Yeah, so with Mary Trump's book coming out, the book on Melania Trump, enough stuff. I mean, this pandemic and the embarrassment and tragedy, the tragedy that it is, and the embarrassment with the government and Trump administration's handling of it. And if you had to look in the crystal ball come November, which is election day, less than 4 months, what do you think?
Well, Donald Trump will lose the popular vote. I've said that for a long time.
Yeah,
I haven't done new calculations, but some time ago I said he'd lose by a minimum of 16 million votes. It's going to be a lot more than that, but that doesn't mean he can't get a second term, because we don't elect presidents by popular vote. We elect them through the Electoral College. And if through voter suppression, which we just saw in Wisconsin and Georgia, done in the most arrogant, open ways, backed by the courts, by the way, supported by the courts, through help from the Russians that Donald Trump told ABC News, you know, hey, why wouldn't I take their help? Never mind that that's a felony. And hubris. If people fail to turn out, oh, I know Trump's going to lose, I'm not going to take the time to go vote. That could get him a second term. And so I wrote about this at DC Report. I also did a piece for the Daily Mail in London, June 6th, I think, about this exact point. And there's no question that he will lose, for example, New York and California. Those are very deep blue states. But he doesn't have to win them. He just has to win enough electoral college states to sneak by. And so it's really important that people register to vote, check their registration. If you have the resources to do so, go to a congressional district that's flippable in one of the battleground states. Those are mostly in the Midwest. On election day and help, or arrange to be on the phone and help. But make sure people actually turn out to vote. So if somebody doesn't vote in Manhattan, Donald's going to lose it by 9 to 1. Doesn't particularly matter. But Iowa, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, those states matter a lot. And people need to turn out. Pennsylvania, Georgia. There's going to be a real effort, especially in Georgia and Florida, to suppress the vote to help Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I keep repeating the famous mantra or saying of you can fool some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. I mean, Trump, the consummate con man, fooled enough people in 2016. It just seems can't happen. But as you point out, the suppression.
Well, you know, Donald did two interesting things during the campaign. He was constantly saying to the audiences, we love you, which was brilliant to do. I mean, when did you hear a politician say, we love you? And the people who were supporting Trump are people who are very unhappy about America as it is. They hate, many of them, America as it is. They want people who aren't white to know their place. Look at the videos that are coming out every day, including the ones of things like attacking Asian and Black and brown people physically just for being. Secondly, he has constantly said 63 million votes. I can't tell you how many people have sent me DMs on Twitter or emails or call-in radio and said, well, after all, Trump won, he was 63 million votes. And I go, no. Hillary Clinton got 66 million votes, and there were 9 million votes for other candidates. Or 8 million, I guess, for other candidates. He lost by 11 million votes. What are you talking about? He won. He got 63 million votes. No, that's not. He got 46% of the total vote. By just repeating the 63 million votes, he has created in the minds of many people this false belief. So
yeah. And the sad thing in the United States is the low voter turnout. Trump won with 27% of the electorate voting for him. That's a whole nother conversation. And I've said out loud to people that the only thing between us and calamity come the end of the year is Joe Biden. That's whatever you think. Joe
Interestingly,
Biden.
Michael, you live in the Hudson River Valley.
Yeah.
And under the old patroon system, which was a feudal land system during the Dutch era when New York was New Amsterdam, that's when voting, to the extent it was held, was set up to make sure that working people couldn't vote. That's why we have Tuesday votes. That polling places were hard to get to. And in many of the colonies, we had a rule that you had to be a landowner to vote. In fact, in New Jersey, we still call the county legislature or board of supervisors the board of freeholders. And this came in part from the patroon system in the area around Albany and up and down the Hudson River Valley. We need to go to, I believe, paper ballots, and there's technologies that we can deal with to make sure votes are properly counted, much better than in the past. We need to have multi-day voting, and we need to make it much easier to vote. We need to have mail-in voting, which they've been doing in the Pacific Northwest now for 2 decades, and my brother lives in Oregon, tells me works fine, and so do all the people I know there.
Yeah, and that's why Trump's been tweeting out about rigged elections, mail-in ballots, and all that.
Even though he votes by mail-in ballot, as does his press secretary and his daughter and his son-in-law and Steve Bannon, they all vote by mail. But oh no, we can't have it. It's full of fraud.
Yeah. So another question. In today's New York Times, Michelle, your alma mater, Michelle Goldberg wrote an op-ed about the pandemic in this country, which, as I said, is a tragedy and embarrassment. And in it, she wrote, "Trump's incompetence has wrecked us. Where are the calls for him to resign?" And so my question to you, David, is, could you see calls for him to resign, especially from any Republican?
Well, would the country be better off of Mike Pence as president, even though he'd be a very weak president? But there's no chance Donald will resign. Yeah. It's just not possible. The only scenario under which Trump might resign is this: a pardon of Donald Trump of himself will not stand. This Supreme Court made that very clear in the way it wrote the opinion this last week. But Trump could resign at 11 a.m. on the morning of January 20th. Mike Pence gets sworn in, and then he grants a pardon to Donald Trump. And I think the Supreme Court would also reject that as a ruse. But nonetheless, other than that tiny possibility, there's no way that Donald Trump would ever resign. His ego will not allow him to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Even the thoughts, people who floated, maybe he won't run, he'll back out.
And he'll just say for the rest of his life, they stole the election, it was all corruption. They stole the election, and he'll do it until the day he dies.
Yeah, and hopefully once he's out, Twitter will ban him once he starts the same stuff.
Well, that would be a good thing for the country.
Yeah. So, and you wrote an article recently about the Supreme Court decision with Trump and his taxes. And when the Supreme Court made their announcement, it seemed like, oh yeah, he's finally going to release it. But you pointed out it gave Trump more a boost than anything.
Yeah, and by the way, I may have been off in my judgment here a little bit. What the court did was all 9 justices, even the dissenters, agreed with the principle that Trump must respond to the criminal subpoena from the Manhattan District Attorney's grand jury, that no one is above the law. And they were all in agreement about that. The 2 dissenters disagreed about some relatively technical legal matters. But then instead of saying, and the subpoena may go forthwith, the court sent it back to the district court in New York, the federal district court, where Trump sought his remedies. He could have fought this out in state court, but he went to federal court and said there needs to be further judicial proceedings. This is a tendency of the Supreme Court to always say you can have all the justice that you can afford, but to look askance when people have not really had proper representation and investigation of their cases. And it's pretty clear by now, we've executed a number of innocent people because they didn't have adequate representation. Yeah. And so I thought Trump will tie this up for a long time. Well, the federal judge has ordered a hearing that will be on Thursday, the 16th of July.
Oh.
Even if he, however, after that hearing says the subpoenas go forth, you can be sure that Donald Trump's lawyers will rush to an appeals court and try to tie it up. How long they're going to be able to tie it up, we don't know. It depends on the attitudes of the judges. We could see those subpoenas enforced in a matter of days or a few weeks, but it could extend into 2021. It's going to depend on how the courts respond.
Yeah, I mean, Trump, among other things, knows how to use the court system. He learned well from his mentor, Roy Cohn.
Right. And by the way, we won't see the returns at that point.
Right.
I'm confident once the documents are obtained, these are the business records of the Trump organization, the accounting records at the Mazars accounting firm, and the banking records from Deutsche Bank and Capital One, that Trump will be indicted for tax fraud. He's already had 2 income tax fraud trials that are in my book, The Making of Donald Trump. They were civil, not criminal trials. He lost them miserably. The New York Times 2 years ago showed very clearly that Donald is a serial major league tax fraud artist along with his siblings. And so he will be indicted. I have no doubt about that, but it won't, some material will come out in the indictment because they have to make specific charges, but it won't be until trial that we're likely to see a full set of records or close to trial about what's going on. And there's no way that's going to happen until sometime in 2021. And I would guess at this point, more likely 2022.
Yeah, yeah. So David, you've written extensively over the years with your books and writings about corporate malfeasance and inequality. And so I want to just ask you, Donald Trump didn't come out of a vacuum. There were conditions going on. So what can you talk about these conditions? What created Donald Trump? This.
Well, I mean, it was this horrible family he's in that created him, but the circumstances and how they relate to corporate America are that we have not done a good job of getting the rules right. We want to have corporations. Corporations encourage people to take risks. For 8 years of my teaching at Syracuse, I taught the law of the ancient world, the business law and the property and tax law, 2 separate courses. And if you in ancient Sumeria or many other ancient cultures started a business and failed, you could be sold into slavery along with your wife, your concubines, these were all male-dominated societies, and your children, but only for a limited period of time, in Hammurabi's code for 3 years. And you were not property. This is not the New World slavery where owners could rape, maim, and murder people because they weren't people under the law. They were best animals and actually objects. You had rights. Well, nobody's going to start a business in the modern world if the cost of failure is you get turned into an economic slave. Corporations allow you to make an investment. If the business fails, you lose your investment, and that's the end of it. Same thing with investing your stock, buying the stock of a company. If the company fails, you lose your money, but you don't lose your liberty or your other assets. Unfortunately, we don't have good mechanisms to both hold companies accountable and restrict their behavior. So one of the things I've pushed for a long time, and particularly in my trilogy that you mentioned that's still in print, Perfectly Legal, Taxes, Free Lunch Subsidies, the Fine Print, Restraint of Trade, and Monopolies, are rules that would make the directors of a company and the senior executives of a company personally and directly liable for their conduct. That would put a lot more responsibility into corporations and stop a lot of misbehavior. As it stands now, we have executives who do all sorts of things that are illegal, and they know they're illegal. They're advised by their lawyers they're illegal. I guess it's now 12 years ago, I exposed how General Electric, for 3 decades plus, engaged in a massive tax cheating scheme in Brazil that probably affected their whole South American operations. And they were told, I had the legal opinions of their lawyers, this is all illegal. They didn't do anything to stop it. And we need to rewrite the rules about corporations. So along comes a sociopath like Donald Trump into this environment. You create corporations, and Donald has hundreds of them. He has over 500 entities, some partnerships, but mostly corporations. And he can get away with all sorts of awful behavior. I mean, in Atlantic City, his casinos, there were children gambling in his casinos, even though it's supposedly the most highly regulated business in the world except for nuclear power plants. And that's true, by the way. God save us from nuclear power plants. They gave liquor and limousines and favors to children who were 12, 13, and 14 years old. I'm not talking about, dolled up 20-year-old who passed for 21. I'm talking about 12, 13, and 14-year-old children, and they got away with this stuff. And Donald himself once said, I borrowed all this money, the $3 billion that he owed 30 years ago, knowing I wasn't going to pay it back. He said it. I always figured that was in his mind, but he actually said it. That's why he couldn't, by the way, after that, get anybody to loan him money except Deutsche Bank, which is essentially a criminal organization with a banking license that launders money for Russian criminals and others, engages in promoting massive illegal tax shelters in the US and all sorts of other awful behavior. They loaned him money, and in all likelihood, they loaned him money only because, unseen by us, was some Russian criminals, one of the oligarchs who report to Vladimir Putin, making a deposit or a letter of credit guaranteeing a loan to Donald so he could get the loan. And by the way, if we eventually find out that that's true, that's one of the things that may come out from the grand jury subpoena in New York, that would mean absolutely that Donald Trump is not a loyal American. He is instead a dependent client of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, which is very obvious, and I guess in the courts you need more than just what is obvious, but documentation. So talking about Deutsche Bank and just banks in general, there's two books that you were an endorser of. I'll start with the first one, Nomi Prince's book, Collusion: How Central Banks Rigged the World, and then Stephanie Kelton's recent book on the deficit myth. Two different takes and different.
Well, Naomi, who worked on Wall Street and is a very astute observer, does a very good job in terms anybody should be able to understand of explaining how the way we've set up the international banking system in the last 40 or so years and the rules we have simply allow banks to run roughshod over us left and right. And that book is a good book to understand what's going on. But the really important book is Stephanie Kelton's The Deficit Myth. I'm the lead blurb on the back of the book.
Yeah, that's...
If Stephanie is right, and I think we need a lot more debate to understand it, but if Stephanie is right about what's called modern monetary theory, this is the most important book in economics since The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith in 1776. It was Adam Smith who figured out market economics. Up to that time, people believed in, as Donald Trump, by the way, does today, in the mercantilist theory. If you, Michael, have a piece of gold or a dollar and I don't have it, then I'm worse off and you're better off. Mercantilists believed there was a fixed amount of wealth in the world. And so it was a zero-sum game to capture and control wealth and take it away from other people. And Adam Smith showed that that was nonsense, that it was competition that created huge benefits. The baker and the butcher and the candlestick maker, each with their resources and smarts and whatever capital they had, competing to outdo others, would make us all better off. And it was government monopolies and government charters restricting who could be in business that were keeping most people poor and dragging the economy down instead of building it up. Modern monetary theory argues that our whole understanding of money is wrong. All of us grew up, and I was taught this in college all the way up to the doctoral level where I studied at the University of Chicago. I don't have any college degree, but I did study at the doctoral level at the University of Chicago. All of us have this understanding that the government taxes us and then it spends the money. And she argues that that's wrong. That the government creates the money, and we just saw this in the bailouts and the stimulus actions over the coronavirus. And then taxes are the system that set the price of money. It costs the government this much to buy an automobile. That's what's going to cost us to buy an automobile. And that the government has some redistributive effects through the taxing. It can't just print money wildly. It can only print money to the extent that the economy is growing. But her argument is that money is not at all what we think it is. And if she's right about that, and this is an idea that's been kicking around now for 25 years or so, it is groundbreaking. Now, about 10 years ago, I said to one of her associates, Randall Ray, who teaches at Bard College, Randy, I don't understand your theory, and if I can't get it, you're never going to sell it to the public. With all my 8 years of full-time college, if I can't get it, public isn't going to get it. And he basically was dismissive. Well, then they're stupid, was his attitude.
No.
Stephanie, who I said the same thing to, starting in 2011, I think it was, took this to heart. And I would needle her sometimes. She'd post something, I would put a comment and saying, you know, they still don't have that. And I kept saying, make it make sense to ordinary people. You got to figure out how to do this. Well, she uses metaphors brilliantly in her book to explain her theory. She took my needling and pushing her to heart. And as I said, we need a lot more debate about this, not the kind of dismissive nonsense of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Oh, this is some leftist nonsense by people who want to spend a lot of money. That's not what the book is about at all. And it tells you how ideologically framed the journal has become under Rupert Murdoch. But if we seriously examine her ideas and they hold up, and I think they will hold up. They may need some minor adjustments. I mean, after all, Adam Smith didn't get everything right in The Wealth of Nations, but he fundamentally got the stuff right. It will transform the way we do the world. It will allow us to become much wealthier as a society. It will allow us to invest in human capital, in people, to fix up our infrastructure, to do lots of things we're not doing by being smarter and having a different understanding. But you know, there's an old saying, for every new idea, there are 10,000 soldiers around the corner waiting to kill it.
And that is so true. The history of new ideas always goes like that. Yeah, and that's why Stephanie Kelton, yeah, I bought the book the first day it came out and devoured it. And that's why she calls her book, the subtitle, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy, because that's really what she's getting at. And you know, the Federal Reserve is, as Naomi Prince calls it, conjuring up money. They've put trillions of dollars into Wall Street banks, no regulations. They do what they want. It's all speculative. None of that money, very little goes into the economy, and we're just doing it the wrong way.
Well, there are two things to think about this. One of them is you've gone to the bank, I'm sure, to take out a loan, right, Michael? I have, you have. Have you ever seen a banker look in the drawer to see if they have enough money to loan you? Or call up and say, do we have enough deposits today to make you a loan? No. If they decide you're credit worthy, they create the money and they loan it to you. And that's what double entry bookkeeping that was invented at the time of the Borgias is about. There's a liability and there's an asset, and they have to match. The second thing that's important about this is that the Federal Reserve has been buying back bonds. I've written about how they're buying back bonds that I don't think are worth their face value because the companies behind them are in big trouble. If you own a bond from a commercial real estate firm right now, I don't think you're going to get all your capital back when the bond matures, because commercial real estate, as we're seeing with people working at home, is going to lose value. But the Fed is buying these back at face value to help prop up the economy. Well, it's also buying back government debt. When the Congress issues debt by running a red ink budget, spending more than it takes in from taxes, and the Fed then buys that bond back, it's the same thing as if that never existed. That's one of her great insights.
Right.
And so, you know, money is simply not what we think it is at the core of her book. And at the same time, you know, this is happening just as I'm seeing more and more ads on TV, because I run the cable news channels, Fox and MSNBC and CNN in the background. And here in my office, we call the Manquarium, because it's got glass on three sides. People are pushing gold. You should buy physical gold. It's a great investment. I don't know why you buy physical gold. It costs money to insure and it doesn't produce a return. And if there's a complete collapse of the economy, you can't eat it. But boy, there are a lot of people like, yeah, gold, that's the real thing. You don't want stocks and bonds, or you want to have some of those, but mostly you want to have gold. And then of course they sell it in these TV shows at enormous markups. You'll never recover your money unless there's some bizarre movement in the market, because instead of buying your gold for the current trading price, you got to pay this fat commission on top of it. That's why they can afford all those TV ads for a product that isn't worth buying.
Yeah. So going further with this, today Joe Biden announced a $2 trillion climate plan with the aim to spend that money over the next 4 years to tackle climate change, create green jobs, and address racism too. So it seemed like he's taking a book out of Stephanie Kelton of Modern Monetary Theory. I read the article in the New York Times, and they, of course, talked how he's going to pay for it, you know, which is part of Stephanie Kelton's ideas of that's the wrong question to ask. But it seemed like you know, Biden's getting, and it was embraced by progressive environmental organizations, his plan. So it seemed like he's going in the right step with what he realizes is needed.
Well, you know, it's interesting. The conservatives came up with an idea back in the 70s about cost-benefit analysis. You know, is it worth it to do something? So if we spend $1 trillion and save one life, is it worth it? And in fact, this goes on all the time. Companies make decisions about the safety of automobiles and other things where we make these decisions. Here's what it'll cost. And it may sound cruel and cold, but it's the way the world works. But when it comes to environment and climate disruption, the conservatives run away from this idea that they came up with. So you buy electricity in New York and pay on average, I think it's around 20 cents a kilowatt hour now. But if we take into account the environmental damage from burning fossil fuels, especially coal, but natural gas too, to make that, the real cost of that is a great deal more. It's just not recorded on the books of the company. It's recorded in terms of global warming, apple crops here in Western New York, where I live, that won't be as good, fish harvests that won't be as good, and of course, melting ice in the polar regions at both ends of the planet, which is going to cause enormous damage. We really need to do a proper cost-benefit analysis. We have the technological capacity to stop burning coal and fossil fuels to create electricity. And if we only use natural gas for peak demand periods like hot summer days, we would radically improve the quality of air. Bill Gates and Dr. Patrick Cheong-Song, I hope I pronounced that right, the owner of the LA Times, are among the investors in a company that has shown that with mirrors and solar energy, they can make cement. Well, about 6 or 8% of all the greenhouse gases emitted in the world come from making cement because they burn tremendous amounts of fossil fuels. If we would understand the full costs, not just the costs that appear on the books of the companies involved, of making electricity, we could have all the electricity we can possibly use, much more than we're using now. You could run your air conditioner, make your house 60 degrees in the middle of summer and have minimal environmental effects, if any at all, compared to what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. But we have to properly account for things. And we're not doing that. We're not fully taking into account what we're doing. And what Biden is doing is moving the country in the general direction of, let's have full accounting of the costs of things, not fixing up our highways. And does anybody think our highways are in great shape? Mm-hmm. There's a cost to that. Far more front-end alignments, far more having to replace broken tires and wheels on cars, delays, and then traffic accidents and people killed because of potholes and things like that. And why don't we, by the way, when I go to China, what I'm struck by is the Chinese highways, they put the Autobahn to shame, and the Autobahn puts the British highways to shame, which put the American highways to shame. Why are we way down this hierarchy of the quality of roads? We can do these things right, but we have to have the political will to do so. And I think Biden is going to move us in that direction. And of course, whoever he picks as vice president is highly likely to be the 47th president of the United States. So we need to pay a lot of attention to who that is.
Yeah, well, we can hope. And as people pointed out, just like the Great Depression led to the New Deal, FDR's programs that really put the government into action to make things happen for the economy, for people. It became a people's economy.
Let's just, this time around, let's have a New Deal for everybody. Remember that essentially Black and brown Americans, Native Americans, Asians were excluded from those programs. Yeah. And I think we're finally coming to the end of the Civil War, which is not, Appomattox was the end of the shooting war, but the Civil War has never been fully resolved in this country. We still have military bases named after traitors. Mm-hmm. But I think we're making real progress in that area. And it's largely because of cell phone video. And just one more thing on that, Michael. You know who the biggest American hero I think is right now? A 17-year-old girl in Minneapolis named Darnell Frazier. She's walking down the street with her 8 and 9-year-old cousin. She sees George Floyd being pinned by the cops. She gets out her cell phone. You see all these cell phones on TV and the camera wildly runs all over the place and looks at the ground and people are talking. That girl is solid and steady and holds it all that time. And the cops threaten to arrest her. She doesn't flinch. And she has this little 9-year-old or 8-year-old at her side. Well, she doesn't. And it's because of her cell phone videos and now all the others that are coming out that we're finally getting somewhere. I wrote about this stuff 40 years ago and got nowhere because there was no video. It was all abstract to people. But things are changing. And hopefully one of the big changes is we're going to get an economy where we invest more in people, where we improve the incomes of the bottom 90%, which are essentially the same now as they were in 1970, a half century ago. And we reduce significantly the damage we're doing to the environment where we have the technology to not do that damage. We just have to have the will to act.
Yeah, so and I think you've said it correctly, David. It's the will. So we're just about out of time now. So I think to wrap it all up and tie it all together, we need to, as you talk about, move into that direction of what you call people's economy and not go into the Neanderthal direction of people like Donald Trump. And let's hope, as you say, you think 16 million more votes may go for Joe Biden than Donald Trump, but let's hope that also—
Absolute minimum of that many, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And let's hope that also translates to—
So I'm hoping when we get a new Congress that we do a couple of things. First of all, we need to thoroughly investigate what went on in the Trump administration, and people who destroyed records, which is a criminal act, we need to prosecute those people and put them in jail to make it clear, no, you can't do bad things and cover them up. Secondly, I think we need to expand the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court keeps saying we can't hear all the cases we have. We're only hearing about 4,000 of the cases even to consider whether to hear them. And so let's expand the court, let's say to 15 members. There's 9, the Congress can set it at whatever level they want. I think we should consider increasing the size of the House of Representatives, which has been fixed since 1910.
Right.
If we had the original House proposed in the Constitution and the 12th Amendment was never adopted, I think we'd have 6,000 members now. I don't think we need that many, but we ought to give some real thought to what if we have a 20% increase, for example. We need to address child poverty in America. There's very good research that shows that every dollar we invest in children from conception to 6 months after birth pays a lifetime return of 7% compounded. Right now, if you can find an investment that guarantees you 7%, go put everything into it. You'll be fine. Just look at the multiplier effect. Every 10 years, the money will double. We shouldn't have all this child poverty. I live 5 blocks outside of Rochester, New York. From the middle of the 19th century, the middle of the 20th century, this was the innovation cradle of America. It was Silicon Valley, Seattle, and Route 128 up in Massachusetts, all wrapped into one. And we got billionaires in the suburbs. They're not in the Forbes list because they don't own publicly traded stock. We got lots of billionaires. Within just blocks of my house, I have friends who own their own jets. And yet in the city of Rochester, every 6th person you meet lives at less than half the poverty level. That means families of 4 on $1,000 a month, because the poverty escape level is $25,000, the federal government's measure. Families of 4 living on $1,000 a month, my God. Now, that doesn't count benefits they may get through government programs, but nonetheless, we have severe poverty. And Rochester's just one of many cities that are like that. There's no reason for us to have that. You don't see it in Europe. You don't see buildings where they put out buckets for the water leaking through the roof. Even in northern Spain, go to Barcelona, there isn't it. I was there 12 years ago and I took my grandson and we went looking for, potholes. We couldn't find any. Same thing in Stockholm. They don't exist. We need to reorient our spending. Do we really need to build a $13 billion aircraft carrier that then requires another $20 billion of support ships, which can be taken out with one missile? Makes no sense. We need to change our priorities and our spending. We need to invest in people, and we need to invest in things that will slow down the cyclical process of climate change. The climate changes, but we've been speeding it up at a horrendous rate unnecessarily, and it will cost us far more than the little marginal costs of can we afford this or that government program? And if Stephanie Kelton is right about it, there's a lot more we can do that would make us all better off, including people who are already rich.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and as we've seen with the COVID, the systemic issues that have come to the surface have really, for people who never thought of it, is really eye-opening. But for the rest of us who've realized it, it brings to time to do something.
Yeah. Science Magazine had a very good piece this week, Michael, asking scientists around the world what you expect from COVID in 2040.
Oh.
And the most chilling one is from a scientist who's in some biological field in India, who started off his little short piece saying that, 20,000 people gathered for the 24 Olympics in New Delhi, the biggest crowd in the world in more than a decade, as society worked on the latest mutation of the coronavirus. And the fact is, I fully expect that I may spend the rest of my life, even if I'm lucky enough to live 20 more years, and never leave my home in Rochester except to drive my car somewhere and if somebody puts stuff in the trunk, because this is a very pernicious virus, and others are going to come along. As the permafrost is melting in Siberia, scientists are finding viruses that haven't been exposed for 15,000 years. The Arctic is now full of viruses that weren't there 20 years ago because of these same reasons. And with 8 billion human beings and jet airplanes, viruses can hopscotch around the planet in a matter of days.
Yeah. So it really is time to make some changes and to birth the people's economy. So.
Well, good we had this chance to talk.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Thank you so much.
Take care.
It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye. Take care.